because so many students of mine are women. I mean, like a 10-to-1 ratio in my class. I have 20 students, 18 of them are women, 2 are men. And it's been going that way for at least 6, 7 years. And so the guys feel like they're in the minority big time, because they are. But to hear you talk, that's why it's so important to hear your story today, because they can relate to you, because they can't relate to anybody else. So I appreciate that very much.
No problem.
So how'd you get started in it, first of all? What was your interest in it way back when?
I wanted to be Quincy.
Oh, I love that. Jack Klugman.
Yes. Yep. I wanted to be Quincy when I was in high school. I loved the TV show Quincy. It interested me when I was still in school. So I did some research and found out that it was 4 years of pre-med, 4 years of med school, and 5 years of internship. And I said, let's do 4 years of college first and see where I can go. So I can be Sam, his assistant.
I love Sam. I remember that. So it was on Monday nights. I think it was Mondays at 10 or Mondays at 9. Back when we had networks and not cable all the time.
Right. I used to watch them after late afternoon reruns before the news at 5 o'clock locally in the Philadelphia area.
Oh, that's too
so funny. I didn't catch them first run. I caught them on the reruns. It was Rockford Files, Quincy MB, probably something else that used to run from 4 to 5, and then the news would start at 5 before news was 24/7.
Yeah, too funny. You know, I'm watching old Hawaii Five-0 episodes back in the 60s. And they had a medical examiner back then too. And it was really good to hear him, discuss computers, using their computers now to track the information down, or how they did it. It's amazing back then that they were, these shows were cutting edge, and now we see what's happening with it. So when you went to college, 4 years of what did you major in?
I started at Westchester University, and I was majoring in forensic chemistry.
Fantastic. They had a choice there between chemistry and biology, or just chemistry?
They had chemistry, they had forensic chemistry, they had biology. The forensic chemistry, because they had a big horse racing industry in Pennsylvania. So forensics was a big part of it, and a lot of it was to do with horse racing and the drugging of horses. Now, I didn't stay there because it was a big party school, and I didn't really fit in that crowd. So I came home, did a year at community college, and then transferred out to Asbury University in Kentucky to finish up my degree in chemistry. My college was the one where I finished was very small, so they had biology, chemistry, chem bio, and I was straight chemistry major there. But I got to finish my last class at the University of Kentucky, and that was That was actually a toxicology class.
Tox, oh, fantastic!
Yeah, they let me finish. I had to take a physical chemistry class 2 semesters. So the first semester, there was 3 of us that were in the class, but the second semester, I was going to be the only one in the class. So they said, it's tough to run it for one student. So we looked at University of Kentucky, which was only 25 minutes away. And so I did a entry-level graduate class in toxicology to replace my second semester of physical chemistry.
And I'm sure the talks, we had a decision to make. I'm a chem guy, and I got into forensics just because we wanted to create a program out here in the cornfields in Little Tiffin, Ohio. So they asked me to come out and help start it. And they didn't have any way to teach the intro to forensic science course, so I said, I'll teach it. I know nothing about forensics at this time. I'm just a chemistry guy. And so I've learned what the approach would be, and how you have to use chemistry and biology together. So when I developed I'll send you our curriculum. When I developed the curriculum for this course, I had to find something. I mean, we only had 3 teachers in the science field. We had a biology, a chemistry, and a physics teacher. That was it.
Wow.
So the choice was either, I had to choose between PChem or tox. I can't teach tox. I'm not qualified. But I hate PChem. I hate it.
I hated it too. I tell everybody it's physics, calculus, and chemistry all in one class at the same time.
I know. And you derive from first principles, all that crap, and they always integrals, and oh god, I hated it.
Yeah.
I was qualified to teach that, so I said, okay, we'll have PChem. Wait until we have a tox person to come in, and we can start doing tox. So we're transitioning over to TUTalks now. And I'll send you our curriculum. We have 96 credit hours of physics, chemistry, and biology in our forensic science major. Our feeling was you have to have the chemistry, as you know, for the evidence, how you analyze for it, and everything else. And the biology we feel is the victim. So we have both of those together, we should have a good program, and I think we do. People are totally good. So you got your chem major done. Congratulations. And then from there, you're looking for jobs where?
I came home to New Jersey and I did up a resume. I walked into the Gloucester County Medical Examiner's office and said I'd do anything, and I'd do it for free just to get my foot in the door. I don't, it was an internship type thing. And about 3 months later, the medical examiner reached out to several of us that had shown an interest in the office and said, I'm going to start a training program. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely.
Wow.
And about April or May of in 1995, he started training us. We met every Monday night, took us into the morgue, showed us, basically taught us how to be an investigator and how to do autopsies. And one day the doctor said, who would like to learn how to do autopsies? I raised my hand and I started being his assistant. Met one of the doctors that was covering through this office. I had moved out to Burlington County, New Jersey, and that I hounded that doctor for about a year. He finally had an investigator resign, and I ended up with a full-time position in Burlington County. Still stayed on staff in Gloucester County. They expanded from Gloucester to Salem counties and then took over Camden counties. I was doing autopsies for the doctor in Camden County part-time.
Wow.
And so I've worked in all four now. I just left Burlington County in September, and now I'm full-time in Gloucester, Camden, and Salem County, both as an investigator on the street, assisting with the doctor, working in the office, pretty much anywhere they need help. And I've had 26 years in Gloucester County, most of it per diem, part-time, and now full-time.
So from graduation until that full-time offer, or at least a part-time offer from your first job, how many years was that?
I graduated in 93, December of 93. I finished up all my classes because with the transfers and some of the grades I had to catch up. So from basically December of 93, I then worked a year of part-time work. I worked as a technician in an emergency room, and I worked for a rubber production company just doing work on presses. I got a full-time job in a chemical production company, and I was a quality control technician in the lab working with PVDF and polyvinylidene fluorides, and they were doing the gases, and they were also making plastics. So we were making a lot of the route for 134A, 134B for DuPont. We would do rail cars.
You had to work with hydrogen fluoride?
Yep. Oh, yeah, we had whole rail cars of hydrogen fluoride come in.
Oh, man, so did I.
And they would process that into the PVDF in these plastic pellets, and they would send the pellets out. They also made a powder to add into paint, and the paint was then to put on skyscrapers and stuff. That was kind of a lifetime, one-time paint to help hold its shine and stuff. But then the gases, the byproducts would then go down to DuPont, and they actually made it into Freon and the Freon alternatives. They were making additives of that. So that was about a year of that. I moved out to Burlington County. I just couldn't do the travel and the night shifts. I was working days and nights in the same week, and it was shifts. So I actually quit there, went part-time with Gloucester. I was basically the first guy to come do autopsies. And then in 1997, so it was 3 years from graduation to full-time employment with the medical examiner's office, but I had maintained part-time employment the whole time with the Gloucester County.
Wow.
In between. So probably assisted in over 2,000 autopsies between privates, hospital, and medical examiner cases over the years.
Autopsy, how old were you when you saw your first autopsy?
It was 1995, so I was 25 years old.
You were how old? 25?
I was 25 at the time. Now, I had been a volunteer firefighter EMT since 16. So I had seen my first dead bodies at the age of 16, and I was fascinated by death. We had a Dr. Claus Speth, was the medical examiner here, who I think was out in California and may have actually been some of the inspiration for the original Quincy
Wow.
And I thought his job was fascinating, and I had always been interested in that side of it from high school.
Wow. Here's a question for you. I've noticed this phenomenon amongst my students, and we just had a forensic science camp last week. We had about 15 to 17-year-olds come to where we had 40 of them. And my philosophy has always been teaching this course is that you have to make sure that you can handle the rigors of the job. So I have many different parts of forensic science. I have real crime scenes that I get fed to all the time from people who clean up crime scenes. So I have a lot of blood spatter stuff.
Okay.
We do ballistics, where they shoot AR-15s and 9mm, make sure they can handle a gun and shoot a gun. I do fire forensics. We do body decomps, where we decompose some chicken or beef, whatever, with some maggots and measure the maggots. But the biggest thing is the autopsies. And I make sure as freshmen, these are all freshmen, that they get a chance to see an autopsy. Can you handle an autopsy?
Yeah.
I want you to find out now, before you waste 4 years of student loan money and realize you can't do it. And what I realized is that once you get the people together in a classroom, they all feel welcome finally, because they all felt kind of as an outsider in their high schools, because they like crime scenes. And they like this kind of stuff. And their friends in their high school looked at them kind of weird. So when they come together in the classroom, they all feel accepted and they love it and they can handle it. And seeing an autopsy with your friends around you is much easier, I have found, than seeing it just with a cutter. Because if you see it just with one, if you see it as a shadow, as a job shadow, you're not allowed to feel weird because you have just the person next to you and you. But if you have 10 of your friends next to you, you can turn to them and say, "Holy cow, what's really happening?" Or they can share it for the first time as a group,
Right.
as an individual, and it really, really helps, especially when you see some tough cases. I mean, you never know what you're going to get. And so we go to either Detroit, Chicago, or Columbus.
Oh, wow.
So we get some real big ones, like hanging victims and gunshots, and we cut a couple of babies, and so I make sure that they get. We get there at 7 o'clock in the morning. We drive an hour. We get to 7 o'clock in the morning, and we see what we got. You never know what you get.
Sure.
But they all handle it. It's a big deal for them, for many of them to come back and kind of brag about it to their fellow students. Like that's what I saw today, and they're like, "Oh my God, you saw that and you handled it." So they feel emboldened by what they just saw.
Yes, absolutely.
When you saw your first one, did it make you realize that you can handle it, or was it you knew before that?
I had assisted with moving basically accident victims and even some fire victims early on in my career as a volunteer fireman. I had seen several fire deaths, several motor vehicle deaths. The other types I hadn't really seen, but the very first autopsy that I saw, I think it was a 10-year-old that hung himself. And part of it was how could a 10-year-old do this? But then at the same time, when you could separate the person from the body, it was amazing. Just to see how the body was put together, how it worked. Nothing prepared me for how awesome it was when you first opened that body and looked inside. You had concepts from pictures and stuff, but pictures and books and even videos don't do justice for when you see it live.
Exactly. I've seen dozens of them with my students. I still have a tough time with them because I didn't get in this field, but it's major. My business was crystals back then. But what I tell the students is this. First of all, there's three different unique things about an autopsy. You're going to walk into a room, and these are all kids who are 18, 19 years old, all right? And they walk in a room and someone's going to be naked in front of you with 10 of your friends around you. That's really unusual, okay? It's really unusual for that to occur. So I prepare them for that. Then the second thing is they're naked and they're dead. And they're right in front of you with 10 of your friends around you. And the last one is they're naked, they're dead, and they're going to be cut open right in front of you with all of your friends around you. Those are three very unusual things. But I tell them that once you go from the body there on the gurney or on the table, that first slice, if you can handle the first slice, because you want to go from a person, once you cut them open, everybody can identify with that. Everybody can identify with the knife being cut open. They all identify with that. But once you cut them open, then it's totally different. It's a specimen.
Yep.
But the slicing open, when you cut the skin the first time, if you can get past that, then you can handle it. because you can identify with that. You identify with
Yep.
a knife being cut in someone's skin. You can identify with that. But once you get past it, then you're okay, because then it becomes a specimen and not a person.
Yeah, when you can separate the person from the body, the history of the person and stuff like that, then it's okay to mutilate like you do for an autopsy.
Right.
And I always see it as, okay, I didn't kill this person, I didn't cause their death, but my job is to find out as much information as I can with the doctor to share with family,
Exactly.
or prosecutor's office or whoever. So yes, it's still a person, but it's not a person that's there now. It's just a specimen that needs to be evaluated and learn from it so that you can
ease
share
the
that
family's
information.
pain to find out how they actually died. I agree with 100%.
They may not like what you find. Sometimes they do, especially when you have the drug deaths. Or they don't want to believe that it's a suicide. So, but when you can present them evidence and let them go from there, then it feels good getting them answers, whether they like it or not.
Exactly, and you're right. They do fight it sometimes because they didn't show any signs of it, or they said they were off the stuff. They promised they were going to quit the stuff.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then they didn't. And then how they hide it from me? So it's a matter of acceptance at that point. I agree with you. It's difficult. The overdoses are challenging for the students more because they look like they're sleeping. The gunshot victims, the hanging victims to me are the worst, because the look on their face and the marks on their neck and everything else is just, it shows you the struggle, that what they did to themselves, or if they were strangled or whatever. But you can see the physical struggle on the outside. When you go to an autopsy, we always have them watch the surface first, or the before you start cutting it open. You got to observe the body first to look for marks or anything else. And so that's a big part of it, and we flip it over. Well, they flip it over. We look at everything else. For our camp, we had because we can't take minors into a coroner's office.
Yeah.
So we had a chance to go to a medical school laboratory near us, and they had a couple pathologists on staff. So they actually had a pathologist do the autopsy of someone who died natural causes, of course, but they still got a chance to see an autopsy. And for them, as 15, 16-year-olds, to see an autopsy was a big deal because their parents, in almost all cases, never have seen one.
Right.
And the parents want to make sure, can my child handle this occupation?
Yeah.
They see the TV shows and they like them, but can they handle it? And when they realize that we put them into an autopsy and they handled it, the parents are relieved. Oh my God, they saw that and they're okay with it, and they're still okay with it. Then they feel better about themselves.
Yep.
That's a big deal. So tell me some cases that, if you don't mind, what were some of the more challenging cases in the past year or so that you can remember?
We actually just had a case where a 50-ish year old man was welding on a tanker trailer, and the trailer actually exploded, which blew him through the roof of the shop that he was working on, out onto the roof and onto the ground, killed him instantly, pretty much destroyed internally, not as much externally, but displaced a lot of organs and damage inside. But it was an instant death.
Wow, so it's hard to do an autopsy on that because everything's moved around.
Yep. Yeah, the sternum was over to the right. A lot of the liver was macerated, the spleen, and a lot of the heart, the semi-dense organs were destroyed. But not a lot of external, injuries compared to what you might think, because it was a concussive blast. So kind of like you would see in some of the militaries that receive not direct shrapnel, but that concussive. Right. That it just totally disorganizes the internal. So that was an interesting case that just happened last week.
Wow.
So we have a lot of decomps this time of year. As they start finding them, people complain of smells, and so we had one woman that died on the couch, and her dog ate her hand, a part of her arm, because the puppy needed, the instinct to survive kicked in.
Yeah.
She had laid there for a few days, and we don't know how long exactly, but enough that there was damage to that. Drug deaths are a constant thing. So that is not unusual. And it's everything from illicit drugs to pill forms that they think are something else. Fentanyl is our number one. We got some illicit along with that, like xylazine. They're mixing. Cocaine is prevalent right now, especially cocaine and fentanyl. Heroin is slowed down a bit, but there's a lot of meth and methamphetamine, amphetamines and methamphetamines that are kicking in, being more prevalent. PCP has phencyclidine has made a comeback in some of the cases. So we're seeing a lot because we handle the Camden city, which is right outside of Philadelphia, and it's a very depressed area. A lot of people go there for drugs. There's a lot of homelessness, a lot of burned out shells where people can seek refuge inside the homes or around without being kicked out. So they can seek refuge in those areas, and it's a prevalent area where drugs are easily available on the street regularly. Can be bought for pennies at a time.
If they overdose in a house like that, no one's going to find them.
Right. Yeah.
So, question for you: how do you take fingerprints of a decomp? The people at med school found a great way to do it, and I thought it was prevalent, but I guess it wasn't. How do you guys take fingerprints of a decomp, or do you?
Decomps we'll try and slough off an outer layer that's in the way, and you still can have some underneath. If they're dried up and stuff, we have to rehydrate. So fluid, saline, and then a little bit of soap. Dawn dish soap is not bad to add a little bit of softness because it makes the skin supple enough to move, but you have to be careful not to overdo it and break down the skin. So we just had a woman that was recent that we cut her fingers off and then had them in stuff to try and do fingerprints, and I think we were successful to get a partial print. But when they're mummified, they're hard. But try to do reconstitution. If you can slough off that outer layer, that if it's not too far gone, you can sometimes slough off the outer layer and then get the first under layer and still get a print. Because a lot of times, what happens when that tissue, if you put ink on it, it comes off and gets stuck on the paper, so you don't get a true fingerprint. Yeah. So you have to like washerwoman's. You have to be carefully remove that loose layer to try and get to that layer that's still intact underneath.
We had a technique that we used at the med school that was pretty interesting. We would take the fingers and inject them with Downy fabric softener. And it would plump them up, and then we could take a print on them.
Nice.
It worked really well. I've heard some people talk about they put like saline solution in a glove and put the hand in the glove.
Mm-hmm. Let it sit.
It's hard to do that because you can't. Some of the fingers just aren't all there.
Yeah.
But the Downy worked really well, and so we have our students do that in the med school. So they do suturing, they inject Downy into the fingerprint to take a fingerprint. Then we had the autopsy, and so they got a chance to do all of that. And for them to actually, inject something into a deceased person's hand or foot was a big deal to them. Can they handle that? Again, they were doing it. They weren't just being shown it.
Yeah,
they were doing it. So it was a big deal. So. Another question for you, and I just have two more, but suicides in terms of, I've seen a lot of creative suicides in the past year and a half from different coroners that have told me. One of them was they found his car running in a parking lot, in a cornfield, and they went up to the car and there was a torso with no head, and they had a head in the back seat, and they thought, okay, it's a homicide. So they followed the tracks back to the grass, then to a parking lot, then to a lamppost where the tire marks were. And they found there was a chain around the lamppost. What happened, they put the chain through the back window around their neck and floored it.
Oh my gosh.
And that was to me as a new one. I've heard a lot of different suicide attempts like that, but that was a new one. that was very effective. Do you have any unique suicides that you come across that were like, holy cow, I can't believe they did that?
I've had two cases where they've taken a circular saw, and I had one in the garage where laid down plastic in the garage, just inside the door from the house into the garage in front of a car, flipped over the circular saw, pulled back the guard, and laid their neck onto the blade. Had another one happen in the basement, exactly the same way. Basically, took a circular saw and disabled the guard and just cut their neck. To do that.
I'm going to share with you something because I had exact same thing happen in Columbus, and I'm going to share with you. Let me bring it up here. Hang on a minute. because that to me was also, I mean, I was cringing about it, but it's also, come on, hang on. I'm gonna do a quick, I have this on my PowerPoint. This is part of the blood spatter that I do with my students. Oh, come on, hang on a minute.
Okay, no problem.
I gotta bring this up here. Okay, it's right there. Come on. There it is. Okay, coming up. What I try to do with my students in the blood spatter is to show them the scenes without the corpse, and then to determine homicide, suicide, and what kind of weapon was used, and so on and so forth. Like you walk into a room, and what I'm working on now is to I have a company near me in Columbus that does 3D scanning, and I'm going to have them scan these scenes, and have the kids have a virtual headset, virtual reality headset, and actually then walk into the room themselves. You guys ever done that before? Have you thought about that? Do you guys do that now?
We haven't done in our medical examiner's office cases. No, I had a class that we were working on. It was a homicidal drowning class that was put on by Lifeguard Systems out of Massachusetts. Just went to one this summer, and they did some 3D modeling of scenes because it was homicidal drowning, both in bodies of water and in tubs and stuff of children. So we rebuilt scenes, but then we also did the 3D modeling of scenes to figure out as we went along to see what was there.
Excellent. I don't have very many decoms underwater. Here's the garage scene.
Yeah,
the same thing.
Yep.
Okay,
very similar.
I want to have it from current slide. Let's go. Here we go. So I'll show you where the head bounced. I showed this is when again I told my students. So there's the main part. I said there's no footprints here, and I have some many single footprints, which means they had to be a suicide and they walked away from it. But I'll show you where the head. I think the head bounced. Of course, there they put the head right there. It looks to me like because you have no footprints here at all. And I think the head bounced here, and then the blood came out of it right there, and it rolled. That's my. I don't know for a fact because I don't have a police report for this, but that's my guess. I know the person was deceased. I know that.
Did he get it completely cut off?
I think that's what I heard from one of the people who cleaned up the thing. I do have a picture of a guy though, from Chicago. I don't think I have it here, but I have one of a guy who tried doing it in Chicago. Let me look it up. I probably have it under Calco, where he backed into it, but once it cut his nerve, then he fell forward.
Okay.
Let me see if it's here. No, that's not it either. I have a couple of jumpers. It's kind of strange is that when you're looking at the different cities, what they have in terms of their preference for their suicides. Like Chicago has the jumpers because they have all these buildings.
Yeah.
And in Minnesota, I just talked to a corner from Minnesota, and she has a lot of water deaths because of all the lakes.
Okay.
So it's really unique when the different cities what they choose for suicide. Now, what is your primary mode of suicide in your city, in Philadelphia?
Gunshot wounds is for probably hours. Number one, and then hangings would be number two, and then we do, because we have several bridges that cross the Delaware River between us and Philadelphia. We get them jumping off the Walt Whitman, the Ben Franklin bridges a lot, and once in a while the Delaware Memorial. Mostly the Ben Franklin. The Ben Franklin, the biggest problem with that, not problem, but the biggest, you could walk across that one from Philadelphia to Camden. So, but the Walt Whitman, you have to stop, your car and then jump over the edge
Okay,
to do that.
understood. Did you see this one?
Oh, that's a mess with a knife.
Yeah, but he lived. So here's what happened. He walks out. He goes in there, stabs himself with one knife, walks out to the kitchen, gets another knife, comes back, uses this knife, the bigger knife that you see right there,
Right.
and then he stabs himself in his stomach. And then he collapses on the bed right there. And they found him there passed out. But because he stabbed himself in his stomach, we both know that fat can seal, but meat cannot.
Right.
There's a lot more fat in your stomach than there is your wrist. So he sealed himself back up again as he fell onto his stomach. And his girlfriend found him. But in this case, so I compare that one. I compare this scene. If you notice in the back, I show my students, notice the back of the sink is clean. The front is where all the blood flow was. Compared to this scene, we see it all, the back is all covered in blood, which is arterial spray. So they cut an artery. And again, it's a matter of showing my students real scenes so they can compare them and understand. And so I would love to have this in a virtual reality headset so they can walk in the room and see it.
That would be really neat.
Yeah. And can they handle it, of course, number one. But two, they can see it. And they can determine for themselves, other than seeing on a 2D dimension, on a screen, they can actually.
Yeah, it's just not the same.
Exactly. And someone tried that for this fall. I did it with a fire scene a week ago, and that worked really well. So I'm looking at getting it done for a crime scene this summer, and I'll be able to use it this fall. So my other question for you, Keith, is how do you handle the mental health aspect of your career?
Number one thing I do is I try and see it as a service to the family. So I try and not see it as a situation where death is a bad end. It happened. Again, I didn't cause it. Not responsible for it, but my job now is to find out for the family answers. And then some of the ones that are a little harder, kids are always very difficult. I'm a believer. I do go to church. I believe that I would say I'm an evangelist type preacher where I fill in for my pastor at my own church and others.
Excellent.
I have the ability. I got my online license to marry and to bury people, and not so much baptize, but bury and marry people. I've done that several times. So I have that. My wife is a nurse. And I met her with the rescue squad out in Tabernacle. So we have a very common bond there. Our first date ended up on a dead body after we rescued the driver of the car, and then we turned it into bringing the dead passenger that died in the accident home. So my wife and I have 25 years of being together, married just 20 years in June this year. So
you can talk about it.
Oh yeah, she works as a critical care transport nurse, so she talks about her cases with me, and I talk about my cases with her. I've had my brothers go with me. My mother, before she passed, she would go on some cases with me. My dad has gone on cases with me, just to be company, just to be with people. It's nice to have that outlet, that ability to kind of share. The feelings do become overwhelming once in a great while. Children are the hardest. I had a particularly difficult case. It was a SIDS death. Went to the hospital, and the entire trauma room where the baby was full of the family, just completely supporting, which was phenomenal. Mom was holding the baby the whole time while I did my SIDS questionnaire. They were very forward in answering questions, helping me out. Anything I asked, they were able to answer and stuff. And thank goodness that I think it was a grandmother was the caregiver at the time of the death. So I'm sure she was distraught over the whole situation, but they were there even supporting her. But the difficult thing was at the end of my questions and the time I was done, I said, I have to go, was to reach over and take their baby away from them and walk away with their child out of the emergency room. I got out to the doors of the ambulance bay and was just crying because here I am, taking their child away from them. And it's now real. It was, I believe it was real before for them, but now it's even more real because I've left and taken their baby away from them. Another one was very difficult, was a child that was found dead and had died with its in the crease of the couch. Mom and dad had 3 kids, were trying very hard, lived in a small apartment with 2 small bedrooms. Dad slept in the littlest bedroom on a single bed. The 2 3 and 4-year-olds slept in bunk beds in the other room. Mom was sleeping on a mattress on the floor. The baby was sleeping on the couch. She gets up, feeds the baby, puts the baby back on the couch, goes to work, gets a ride to work, and leaves dad home with the kids. He gets up, finds the baby unresponsive, calls 911, pronounced, go out there. And I was able to look at the baby and immediately know that the baby had been in the crease of the back of the couch, either not that it had rolled over, but somehow ended up face into the crease, because you could see red in the middle, beautiful white marks. I say beautiful because that's what we talk about, but beautiful, easy marks that down both sides of the cheeks, and red right in the middle. Baby had suffocated accidentally. That was easy. But then when I started doing the information, I went, oh my gosh, like you start name, you do date of birth. I went, oh my gosh, this baby was born the day after my son.
Oh, wow.
Then I looked to see where the baby was born. The baby was born in the same hospital as my son. This was like around Christmas time, and this was the baby was 10-9. My son was 10-8. And I'm looking, I'm like, oh my gosh, we probably walked past this family, and I may have even have seen them, not thought twice about it, walking in and out of the hospital to see my son, and they were doing the same thing for their child. And I just couldn't wait to get home and grab a hold of my son and just hold on to him. And thank goodness he was still there. And this, knowing this family was going through that. So he's now 17, almost 18. And, to think about that was a tough one, because it was so close.
Yeah. You say 10-8, meaning October 8th?
October 8th, yeah.
Mine's the 7th.
Okay, yeah, nice.
Wow.
Yeah, he's October 8th, 2004.
Wow.
So he'll be 18 and he'll be a senior. And then last night, I'm sitting at a meeting at a diner with one group of people for what we call NOAC, which is National Order of the Arrow Conference. It's going to be in Tennessee in July, with a group of adults preparing for that, on a phone call with my band parent meetings, because he's in the marching band. And my pager goes off to tell us there's a motor vehicle accident, vehicle into a tree right at the intersection of where we live, Ford truck that my son drives. And I immediately call him, doesn't answer the first time, doesn't answer the second time. And the third time it finally picks up. He's like, what? I'm like, you're home, right? So my heart just sank, and I was talking to my, so that's the bad part of the history and the knowledge and the experience of, we know, because the report was vehicle into a tree, on fire, patient unconscious. And I'm like, it's right at the intersection of where my son would, if he was coming home from the Wawa, to turn in and go to our house. And I was like, oh my goodness. So yeah, there's been times like that have been difficult. So that's part of how I deal with it, part of how the mental health side of it. Seeing suicides regularly can be difficult, because I don't like, not say want to or like to, but knowing sometimes the history behind it, of why people do what they do, because that's always the biggest question. Why did they do it? My grandfather committed suicide when I was 16 years old, or almost 16. So I had an experience, and I said, well, that experience that I went through, I now have empathy that I can use, having gone through that experience, with other people and families. So I feel that I can, when I'm on the phone talking with them, on scene talking with them, I can have a little better understanding of what they're going through at the moment, instead of just being, well, I understand. Yeah. I know what you're going through. Well, I don't know what they're going through, but I at least have an experience that I had of my own.
My mom tried committing suicide twice in a month when she was in her 80s.
Oh my goodness!
And so we had to put her in a psych ward the first time, and then we had to put her in a home the second time, because we couldn't put her back home. And so that was kind of a challenge to deal with your mom when she was that old. And she had no signs of Alzheimer's. She did 3 years later. But at the time, she didn't have any signs of it. We didn't know what was going on. So I can empathize with you on that one. Would you be interested? Here's a question for you. I'm creating kind of an online version of the forensic science course that I'm doing right now. And I would love to have just 1 week, one lecture only out of 15 lectures, one lecture from your perspective of a DI and what your specialty is, and so on and so forth. It'd just take an hour of a lecture, and that's it. think about not until spring of 23 or fall of 23, but just consider that, because I'd love to have a course created by experts such as yourself, not by me. I mean, I'll monitor the exams and everything else, but to have you kind of share with your experience and your expertise and everything else on the job with dozens of students. Would that interest you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love education. I love teaching. I was able to present basically the medical examiner role at a large symposium for EMS responders a couple years ago locally. The Rowan University and Gloucester County EMS puts on a 3-day symposium for credits for them, and I was able to give a lecture. Had a lecture prepared, like how does it work? What do we do? I had some pretty cool pictures of death and like warned them, hey, this is going to be kind of gory, but for what they were as EMTs, it was nothing they hadn't seen at least a little bit.
Right.
But what we look for, how we do our job, and why we do our job. So
excellent.
But any kind of information that specific topic that you would like to talk about or have information about, I can certainly research it and put together a lecture for that.
I think it'd be helpful for students to hear from the expert, because that way they're getting the real stuff. And to me, I'm not an academic. I mean, I went to school and I was in my profession the whole time. I was in the industry the whole time, and so I'm not going to try to claim to be something I'm not. And so I try to get experts in the field come to my class and talk and teach at least the lab portion, that topic. I can do the background and the lecture portion, but the lab portion, the hands-on portion, I bring in the experts. Like we bring in the bomb squad to blow up a car. Well, you can't do that in the lab. Well, you can't do it twice. So to me, to be able to do that kind of stuff and investigate an explosion or a fire investigation or decoms or whatever. So I think it's critical to have the students be at least exposed to the experts in the field, which is you. I can introduce the background of whatever topic we want to cover, but you can get the details of it. That way you're not bogged down in that, but you can listen to the details on how you do it. So I'll be in touch with you on that. I mean, it'd be fantastic if you could. Like I said, it's not going to happen until next year, spring or fall, but we'd love to have your interest in that, though, that'd be for sure. So excellent. Keith, it's been tremendous. Truly. I thank you for your time.
Oh, no problem.
Perspective, how you got to where you got is so critical. And to have that happen at an early age will convince my campers that I had last week that they feel the same way. That it's okay to feel weird about crime scenes and death and everything else, because that's what you want to be. And it's okay to feel that way. So
oh, absolutely. Yeah, I knew in high school that I was interested in death and death and dying kind of things, and I just was fascinated by it. So I figured out, I looked to see, okay, how can I get there? Now I admitted that I probably was not going to be a forensic pathologist as far as a doctor, because I really didn't want to be a medical doctor. I didn't want to teach. I wanted nothing to do with treating live people. I wanted to go play with dead people right from the beginning. It wasn't something that I went to medical school or was interested in going to medical school and go, oh, I think I want to do pathology, because I really had no desire. And then after I had my job in the lab, I was like, oh, I definitely don't want to be stuck in a lab doing toxicology. I enjoy being out on the street, interacting with people, a new scene and interesting cases, and some of the everyday mundane cases too at the same time. But interacting with families and getting them answers, interacting with law enforcement. I've interacted in every level of law enforcement, from local police departments to our state. I've even had federal, I've had DOD, the Judge Advocate General. I've worked with some cases because we have military bases locally that we've worked with military servicemen that are active or weekend active. We've had federal, we had state prisons, we had Fort Dix Federal Prison that I worked with. So pretty much every level of government, every level of law enforcement, even FBI, OSI, CID, so the law enforcement of the military, law enforcement, different things. Because even when we had an airline crash, was not thank goodness, a large airline, but we had 2 airplanes, a 2-seater, run into a commercial small engine, killed 11 people that day, 9 in one airplane and two in the smaller airplane. So that was a day. Well, actually, it was a week long. By the time we were done, we were able to identify everybody, but some of the injuries were just absolutely massive. That was early on in my career. I've had single engine airplanes. I had a military jet that was an antique. The guy came down, goes to take off, the engine stalls, and he goes into a barrel roll, kills him right on his own airport. But he was still strapped into his ejection seat. And we had to have the military come out and go, yeah, I'm not touching this until you guys deem that this ejection sheet's not going to take off and take us with it. I had a single engine airplane that crashed in the woods that we had to drive way out in the middle of the Pine Barrens. I've had everything. I had a guy that jumped out of a tree, tied a rope high enough that when he jumped, his head popped off, literally. We've had skeletons hanging in trees, and people ask, how do you do that? Well, you hang yourself, you get caught in the tree. I had another one where the head fell off, the head was still in the tree, and the body was on the ground.
Oh, wow.
So 25 years of, cases, if you're looking for specific ideas. And I don't want to be a storyteller. I don't want to just tell the war stories, but if, that help enhance the discussion, I'll certainly talk about cases, but I don't want to just stand and tell war stories because they get old, they get tiring even to the people. I would definitely use them as examples and stuff. So if you have guidelines of what stuff you want to talk about. Yeah. I had a guy shoot himself with 2 guns at the same time, and people are like, well, what do you mean? Yep.
Wow. There's one guy that, what I try to tell the students are, I discuss the case, or bring up the case, then we discuss it. How did this happen? How could they do this? What does it match what you see? And especially in the blood pattern, I try to make sure they can see all that kind of stuff. And there's a guy who stabbed himself in the neck 6 or 7 times. And I say, now imagine being the coroner who had to count that. And some of them, and we talk, it's a whole chapter on wounds. Okay. And we look at the wounds and say, now this did not come out all the way. This was put back in. It was like a trailer one where he comes out halfway, cuts up the neck, goes back in again. He was on meth. So he just kept going until he got tired, I guess. But it's hard to fit that many stab wounds in just your neck.
Yes.
It really is. And it's even harder to count them all. And so once I get over the shock, I try to analyze it with them and say, how do you count them? How do you find the blade width? Are you sure this is the right blade that was next to the person? Because they all make this over. Some of us just come in here and stab him like crazy and then leave the blade in his hand and walk away. How do you prove that? So we do a whole chapter on wounds because I think wounds are important. Unlike gunshots, which are sometimes easy to detect, you got to look at a wound and say, what caused this? That's your marker, And it may not be there. The weapon may not be there. You got to find out what caused it. So, anyways, well, we will do that absolutely. So I really appreciate that, Keith, big time.
No problem.
And thank you for your time today. I will edit this, and then we'll send it back to you for your review before we send it out there. Okay.
Okay.
Keith, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It was fantastic. The kids will love this stuff.
Good. I look forward to working with you some more.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye.